Now I'm going to really quickly cover a topic that photographers call equivalence. It's not really critical for surf photography, but it will give you a really good way of comparing different cameras and different lenses and the combination of the two. So I'm going to run through this fairly quickly. There's lots of information that you can find online which will go into lots more detail. This is going to be a really quick primer that just goes through the factors that affect surf photography. So basically, equivalence is a way of comparing different lenses, especially their focal length and aperture, that are designed for different sizes of sensors and film. So originally 35mm film cameras like this Canon AV1 were really popular. Lots of different manufacturers designed lenses that worked for it. And if you bought a 50mm lens for your Canon 35mm camera and a 50mm lens for your Olympus 35mm camera, you could be pretty sure they were going to have a very similar field of view. You're going to see basically the same thing when you look through the viewfinder. So when they started developing more and more digital cameras, they decided to use different sizes of sensors. Now you'll see a lot of professional photographers who really like to use full frame digital cameras, and that basically means the sensor inside their camera is the same size as a 35mm piece of film. If you're like me and you don't necessarily want to spend the top amount, you might want to go, or you want a smaller camera body, like one of these. They call it a rangefinder style, but it's basically a smaller camera body allows you to pack more into a smaller camera body. You need a smaller sensor, and that's where sensors like APS-C, which is what the Sony uses in the A6 XXX range, or Micro Four Thirds, which is smaller again, and that's what Panasonic and Olympus use. So you end up with a smaller sensor to fit into a smaller body, and there are pros and cons, and I've got resources underneath to tell you the differences. But let's talk about equivalence really quickly. If someone says the 35mm equivalent focal length of a lens, what they're talking about is take the focal length that's written on your lens, which is in this case 35, times it by what they call a crop factor, which is how much smaller your sensor is to a 35mm frame. All you need to know is every camera has a sensor in it, and each sensor has a number associated with it, and you times the focal length by that number and you get what the equivalent 35mm focal length would be. It's pretty, it's not super easy to understand, but let's say I've got a Sony a6500, I put my 35mm lens on it, that I times 1.5, which is APS-C's crop factor. Micro Four Thirds is 2, makes it a lot easier to do the maths. So I put my 35mm on my a6500, and that equivalent focal length is just over 50mm. So it's going to be very similar to the type of image I see when I look through my Canon 35mm camera with a 50mm lens. And that goes the same for every lens you put on the camera. So the reason it's confusing is they always list the focal length on the lenses as if it was designed for a 35mm camera, but it often isn't. This lens, for instance, is designed for an APS-C camera, but you're going to get an equivalent field of view which is different to what's written on the actual lens. It also affects the aperture, and there's lots and lots of details that you can go into, but I just wanted to give you a really, really quick high-level view, so that if someone says, if you read somewhere 35mm equivalent, then at least you know roughly what they're talking about, and you've got the tools at your disposal to go and find out exactly what they mean. There's a lot of people who tend to promote the full frame lens as a professional option, but they're coming down in price, and they're very accessible for amateurs now, and they're even making much smaller bodies with mirrorless cameras. So there's a good chance that you're going to see a full frame camera available. It might be in your budget, it might be something that you aspire to in the future. Just be aware, for my personal surf photography, I can't see any benefit to having a larger sensor personally. There are some benefits to having a smaller sensor. It means, like I said, with that 1.5 crop factor, if I use a 100 to 400mm lens on this camera, then I get the same field of view as I would with a 150 to 600mm lens on this camera. There's other trade-offs and things as well, compromises that you make, but that's one benefit from shooting from the beach at least. And the other benefit is smaller sensors means you can design smaller lenses. So like this 55 to 210mm is designed for a smaller sensor size, so it's possible to make it quite a lot smaller than a 70 to 200mm, which they designed for a full frame sensor. So hopefully that gives you a really quick idea of equivalence and why it affects, how it affects surf photography in particular. Lots of resources in the links in this section of the course, so go nuts, go and find out all about it. Don't go too mad, because honestly I don't think it's going to affect the day-to-day surf photography that much.